Thank you, everyone, for joining. I know it's getting towards the end of the conference. So my name is Thoyob, and our talk is about SQL assessment. Before I get started, I'm not going to read the whole abstract, but I want to mention two things that changed since I submitted this abstract. If you read the abstract, there was 232 rules, but Microsoft did uh, publish few more new rules. So now it's 244. And there's another thing happened is for for SQL Server running on Azure VM, you can now do this assessment in the portal. So we'll take a look at this. But before that, some housekeeping. So I want to thank the organizers for arranging this. It's phenomenal. 300 sessions in a hybrid mode. Speakers from all over the world, volunteers, awesome job, flawless. This is my second session. I've been following it remotely from US, but kudos to everyone. So if you see them, I know they're packing up. It's towards the end, but thank them. Also, thanks to our sponsors. I do not believe without the support from these sponsors, it's possible to bring this kind of conference worldwide in a hybrid format. So if you need a product that one of these sponsors have, I would prefer you look at them first. Of course, it has to meet what you are looking for. But again, thanks to all the sponsors. So let's get going. Now, why would you listen to this talk? Right now, there are 12 or 14 other sessions going on. This is a Saturday weekend. Why would you spend your 50 minutes listening to me? If you are just managing one or two SQL Server and a couple of databases, probably not much use this talk for you. But if you are managing hundreds of SQL Server, thousands of databases, Azure managed, Azure SQL managed instance, SQL Server running on Azure VM, and you want to make sure that you are following the recommended best practice configuration for your SQL Server and databases, then this is a talk for you. We'll see with minimal effort how we can do that. And all these rules are suggested by Microsoft, the best configurations. But I understand, as I've been working with SQL Server for a while, sometimes those configurations might not work for you. Sometimes the defaults is not optimal for your workload and for your environment. So we'll also talk about how can you override some of those rules, how can you modify the rules, how can you even write your own rules. And there are third-party rules that you can brought in, but be careful before you deploy those into production. As I highlighted in yellow, do not use rule sets from untrusted source unless you thoroughly test them. You can also disable some rules, right? So there are 244 rules. If you're pretty sure that some of those you do not need to check, it's not relevant to your environment, you can always disable those so they don't run when you schedule those. What are the environments get supported? So as I listed here, I'm not going to read this. Pretty much all flavor of SQL Server, and even on Linux and Windows. As we know, recent versions of SQL Server can run on Linux also, operating system. So I really do not have any PowerPoint slide. I'll go to the demo. And these are some of the files that I'm going to use. And at the end, also I have one extension, and I want to show you um, some things on the portal. Now, the tool that you are seeing right now, or the product that you are seeing, is called Azure Data Studio. Um, I'll be mostly using this. What's Azure Data Studio? It's a lightweight tool, multi-platform. It's the extension base. What do I mean by that? As I said, it's a lightweight. So if you need some other feature, you enable an extension, you can disable it after you are done, right? Or you can even uninstall it. Microsoft has written or published many extensions. There are extensions also written by some vendors like Redgate has their own extensions. Also, there are individual contributors who wrote extensions. But you should always test it before you use those extensions against your production environment. And I'll show you how you look at your extensions and what are these. Also, another thing, if you are new to Azure Data Studio and notebooks, I highly urge you to check what is a notebook. The one I'm using right now is a notebook, and as you will see in the subsequent notebooks, that you can have your comment, you can have pictures, URLs, your code, and when you run your code cells, you can save the results and then share it with your team. This is getting more popular for diagnostics, troubleshooting. So you, all of the people in a team, you are using the same notebook, so you are troubleshooting in the same way. You can share with each other. And this extensions IP1B is telling that it's a notebook. Now there can be different kind of notebooks. As you see, the kernel is PowerShell. If you go to the dropdown, you will see there are a bunch of other kernels, and Microsoft is always expanding on this. Recently, there was a new kernel on Custo, and I know I'm not talking about that, but I'm just telling you that there can be more and more. There's Python support, and there's uh, SQL and other ones. So that's kind of, and I also put some resources here that later on, if you want to go and take a look, you can read more about it. Some of these notebooks that I'm going to use, I did not write those from scratch, so I want to make that clear upfront. Some of those are written by the Microsoft team, and I did check with the project managers. They're absolutely okay me using, and I did edit those notebooks, but with their permission and sharing it with the community. They're absolutely fine with that. I'm going to talk about this at the end also. Please take 1 or 2 minutes and give feedback. There are cool prizes the organizers are giving out for feedback, and also they are planting tree for, I think, for every 10 feedbacks they get. Also, they want to improve, right? So next year, when you come to SQL Bits 2023, we want to come stronger than this year and with a better experience. So please, go here. You can also scan this and give us feedback. So let's get it started. So before I even round up some of these rules, show you some setups, I just want to give you a feeling of, what are these things, what are you talking about? So what Microsoft did, all these 244 rules, they also published it in a CSV format and JSON format in their GitHub repo. So we have access to that full rule set. So I loaded this into a SQL Server table, which is running in my laptop. It says SQL Server 2019, doesn't matter what version. So just to take a look, what are these things talking about here? And as you see, I switched to a SQL kernel and I'm connected to my local named instance. So as I said, there are 244 rules. Let's just take random 5 and see what are these. So every rule has an ID. And if it's enabled, disabled, there is also severity level, right? Medium, warning, critical, and all that. And you have a display name and a message telling you briefly what is this rule about. And then you got tags, and you will see more use of this tags, because using the tags, we can um, use that as a predicate if we want to run a subset of rules. So all rules belongs to the default rule set, but then you will see more of this, like performance statistics, trace flag memory. So you can always say run all the rules that belongs to memory with the tag. So that's a cool feature. That's why the tags can be used, and you can search also. And there is a brief description, and really the help link will give you the in-depth, right? What this rule is about, what this is talking about, what problem is trying to solve. So all these links goes to against Microsoft documentation. Also, each rule has a scope, right? It has either a server scope or it has a database scope. So that's what is listed here. If your rules are applicable for, so there are some rules that will not work on Linux, probably just on Windows. So and some will work on both. This is mentioned. And then we talked about managed instance and other target engine edition. So it's listed here, and the minimum target version, right, is also listed in this. So that's how these rule sets are. Now let's look at a few more things. Target type. So we have database and server scope, as I mentioned before. And these are the criticality level, right? And how many rules belongs to this. It's just simple aggregation just to give you an idea what are these things. So as I said, there are 48 rules that only belongs to Windows. And why do you see a null here? So oftentimes you see a rule that's categorized as an override. What does that mean? So like Microsoft had a recommendation for SQL Server 2012, and they changed that recommendation, say in SQL Server 2017. So it is still applicable for SQL Server 2012, 14, and 16, but not applicable, or a different value is applicable for 2017 and plus. So they will have an override rule on that rule. That's why some of these you will see null. And these are the additions. So how many applies to each one? And these are the minimum versions. And these are some of my favorite. And if these are not your favorite, I will take offense. It's just some of these I want to mention that I use a lot, and I think they are very useful. Like a login equals password, weak password. Your tempdbs are same size or no. So before we deep dive, I'm going to just look at a couple of these to start with, and then we'll dive into this. I will be using two PowerShell function. I'll talk about this in the next notebook, but just bear with me for now with this. So I'm just going to declare some variables. These PowerShell functions are part of SQL Server modules. So you have to have a minimum version, which I have in my comment section in the next one. So just to start with, right, we'll be using invoke SQL assessment server instance. So I'm pointing to my local instance, that's SQL 2019, it's the named instance running with CU15. And I'm just checking deprecated features, right? Which if you're doing upgrade, uh, when you are practicing in your non-production, you might want to see if there are any deprecated features. Now, one thing throughout the presentation, I'm not going to focus on this outputs. I'm not going to talk about what problem is trying to solve, how you solve it, because there are 244 rules. We do not have enough time. Just if we want to talk about, why TMDB files should be same size, what should be our optimal setup for max memory. You know, one or two of this can take the whole 50 minutes. So I'll, oftentimes you'll see me, I'll just get rid of the output and just run it, because my whole goal is to show you how you can set this up in your environment, how you can schedule this, how you can run it and do some reporting and make improvement or in your environment, not to talk about individual settings and how you can improve, fix those. That's just not possible in 50 minutes. So one of the examples that you can check with the TMDB files not same size. Now, why you should have TMDB files same size? It's a different talk. Definitely, search online. There are, Microsoft has recommendations. There are a lot of blog posts from other technologists. So for demo purpose, what I'm going to do in my local instance, I'm going to make one of the files different size, right? I'm connected to my TMDB to my local instance. So I made one of those different size. Let me close this. Right. And now, if I run this rule, as you see here, I'm not running every rule, right? I'm just running a rule with this ID. I can also run some rules with the tag. Now, this is going to tell me that it's a warning that all my TempDB files are not same size. Now, if I go here and revert what I did, come back here, I run this rule again, there is no warning. Just for a demo purpose, you're going to create a login with the same password. I do not recommend this at all, just to show you. As you can see, it says that I have a login with the same password. I hope you don't have this in your environment, but there's another one to check weak password, which is also pretty nice, because as you see every day pretty much in the news, either a ransomware attack or other attacks on different farms, right? Today, if you ask the CTOs uh, what keeps them awake at night, I think the common answer you will see, or a common theme, will be ransomware attack and other attacks, right? So you want to make sure people are using a strong password. This is a nice check that you can set up for weak password and log in with the same password. And this will check across the board with just one line of code. And I'll show you later on how you can automate this for your whole state. Like if you want to run it against hundreds or thousands of servers, I have that code here also. Now, so far what I'm showing you um, is, we are just outputting this, right? And in the screen, we're not saving it somewhere. That also I'll show you, in subsequent demos. So just hold on to that. uh, Duplicate indexes, unused indexes, right? These are some of the stuff that we do care as a database professional. So I'm just going to run some code just for demo purpose here. And I think I put it at the top, that from where I copied this code. So I went too far. And now if I come here, checking for duplicate indexes, and I'm also checking for unused indexes. Now, I do not recommend you get this output and you immediately go and delete those, right? Please make sure there are awesome blog posts you will find, how to tackle this, right? Because you might be seeing unused index because it's probably being used by a report that's used by CTO or CFO or whoever, probably once in a month or once in a quarter, right? So they be careful, even with the duplicate indexes. There are some other precautions. Don't just run this and start deleting it. So I'm not going to run all this. There's a max memory one. There's another one, power plan, right? Oftentimes you will see that you open a case that things are slow, and then Microsoft will, find out that your power plan is not set up correctly, right? I know with global warming and all that, we all want to conserve power, but not for SQL Server when you are paying couple of grand for each CPU, right? You probably want to have those CPUs work harder for you. So you can also set this up. So here I have a warning that I need to switch to um, high performance power plan. I do not have that, right? So this is a small partial command that you can see, what are listed. So if I set this, this is a high performance power plan. And now if I run this again, you will uh, yeah, you'll see that I do not have any warning, right? So I'm going to revert back for future demos. So these are a couple of my favorite ones that I want to share with you. Now, if you see in this demo, there is one notebook. It says quick start notebook. I'm not going to talk about this, but you will be able to download this from my GitHub repo. The reason I'm not going to talk about this because the in-depth one includes everything in the quick start. And quick start, I put it here for someone who doesn't have time. They want to just uh, see how this works. Just want to spend few minutes. Quick start will be a nice one. But if you really want to go deep into this, then come to the third one, and that's where we'll be focusing next. So I'm going to take a pause. I've been talking about for almost 20 minutes. Is there any questions in the chat or from the room?
No, I don't think we've got any questions here. No.
Okay, so then I'll move on. So this is the notebook that I talked about. And as I said, I copied it from here and then I modified it for this demo. Ruleset.json also published in the GitHub repo. Also, there's a CSV file you can download and see. These are the two commandlets that we use to mine this API. And I made this link. So this will, if you click this, it will directly take you to the Microsoft documentation where you can read more about these two PowerShell functions. As I said, they are part of SQL Server module. You need the minimum version is this. I noted here, so make sure you have this version minimum or higher than this so that you can use it. So we're going to import this. I have a little bit higher version of this, so it should work. Now, one thing I'm not going to read all this, but sometime you will see warning that some of the rules cannot run, and it cannot run because your XP command shell is turned off, and which you should have turned off unless you have a valid reason. That's what the recommendation is. And the product team is aware of this, and they are working on it to modify this. And so in going forward, it is not using the XP command shell, and you do not have to have that turned on. because right now they need access to the WMI. And as I quoted here, we are now working on direct access to WMI using .NET API, so we do not need that. But for now, uh, if you need to run these rules that use XP commercial, my suggestion will be to turn it on, enable it, run your code, and then disable it again, right? If that's what your standard is. So I just wanted to make it clear. So read these notes if you're going to set this up in your production or when you're going to test it. Now, of course, I talked about just two functions, but to make your life easier, you're probably going to use some of the other ones like get SQL instance, right? That tells me what instance I'm going to run this. And I know in this notebook, I'm going to run it against just a single instance, but I'm going to show you in the next one how you can run it against all your, hundreds of thousands of servers. So now this is my local instance. I'm getting it, get SQL instance, and then I'm saying invoke SQL assessment. Uh, Let me go up a little bit. I should have mentioned this earlier. So mostly I'll be using this, but I can also use get SQL assessment item. What does that do? That doesn't run the rules, but it just shows you in that scope, that database or that server scope, or using a tag or a ID, what are the rule set that will get evaluated if you invoke those, right? So you can get a list of those, and then you can combine those two. You can first say, give me these items, and then you can say, invoke SQL assessment against those items. So you can combine those two, and you will see those in my examples. Let's run this. Now, while this is running, as I said, the output will be very long, and we're not going to focus on that because of time. So we run this against a instance, means it's going to run the rules that are at a server level scope. Now, I said option one. Why do I say option two, three, four, five, six? Not all of us write the code in the same way, but we can write, in different way, but get the same result. So you can run the same rule or same set of rule against this instance by using all of these commands. Of course, I'm not going to run this, but in case, people can have different flavor, people are used to writing in a different way. All of these are valid, but you're going to get the same result set. Now, what I did also, let me go to the portal. I did spin up a VM because we do not have time to do this right now. In this short session, so I have a Azure VM that's running SQL Server. If you want to run your assessment against that, I know I'm using a public IP address. Absolutely not recommended. I'm just doing this for demo purpose. At my work, we don't expose public IP addresses for our VMs. We use private endpoints, and that's what you should do, or what other secure method you have. Now, if you want to run this, we can run this against. No, kernel is dead. This is the last thing I wanted. Okay, kernel is dead. So let me see if other commands work. No, it does not. And why would it do that? Okay, hopefully we're back. Sorry about that. Okay, so now it's running against that VM. And I'll also show you how you can do this through the portal. This is a new feature recently added by Microsoft. I already ran it this morning because it takes some time to set up, and I'm going to show that. So this is how you run it against a uh, Azure SQL VM if you want to run this assessment. But absolutely not, exposing the public IP address. Now we saw how to run it against a whole instance. Now, how about I want to run this against a single database, right? So here I'm using again another command, get SQL database, and I pass my database name. This is a Microsoft provided demo database that you can download from GitHub, and you can restore it in your environment. Now, if I do this, now I'm running it against a database. So it's going to run the rules that are at a database scope. Again, I wrote here option one, and you also have, option two, three means you can run the same command using, in a little bit different way, but you're going to get the same result, right? And as I said, I'm not going to even, read all this outputs. I'm just going to get rid of it once it's done so we can move on. Now, I'm not going to run this, but just to show you here, I did not mention a database name. So if I want to run this assessment against all the databases in a single instance, I can run this command. It's going to take some time. That's why I'm not going to run it for now, but you will have the command if you want to do that. I talked about get SQL assessment item, but we haven't used it so far, right? So this is the first time we're going to use it. What I'm doing here is this is not going to run any rules. It is just giving me a list that if I want to run this against this instance with this command, what are the rules that's going to get evaluated, right? So it's just like in PowerShell, what is that? What if switch, right? What's going to happen if I run this? It's similar to that. And again, if you want to see, the rules, if I run it against master database, same concept, you can do that. You can also try that with the severity. I can, with the tag, right, which I said at the beginning. I just want to run the rules that's tagged with the trace flag. I can do that here. Now, if I want to run a single rule, I can also do that with a rule ID. So here I'm running XP command shell on. So I have it disabled, so it's not giving me any warning. If we come here, just for demo purpose, uh, if we do something bad or not recommended, now run this, it's going to give us a warning. And if we revert it, come here, we run this, we do not get any warning. So I have, a couple of other things that I said, you can check your backup. Uh, yeah, outdated transactional log backup. Um, and this rule, what happened with the recent release, it is not checking the full backup any longer. I did report this to the PMs. In the previous version of the rule said, it will tell us that if your full backups are older than 7 days by default, it is not doing. So I'm aware of it. I found it during my test recently, and I'm sure they'll be looking at it. I did get an email from them. Now, how do we save these results, right? So the ideal will be to schedule this maybe, whatever interval you want, say like a 7 days or every, 2 weeks, save it in result and do some kind of reporting, right? Because today I see I have X number of things are not in compliance. Next week I make some improvements. So I should have a reporting that things are slowly getting into, my issue numbers are going down. So this is a way you can do that. Again, I'm not, there are other PowerShell commands that I'll be using, and you can look this up, online if you're not familiar with this command. So if I do this, now I'm running a assessment against my instance, and I'm saving it to this same instance, database name, and a table name, right? Now, if I go and run this, I can see that all the results are saved here, right? And I'm not going to go into reporting, but a quick thing you can do, there's also advantage of these notebooks. is it has some built-in visualization. It's pretty good. There is also another extension called Sandance. You can look at that too. So just doing some group by, I can just click this, and there I have a report right there without doing anything. I know mine is all over the place, but uh, in a real shop, it's probably going to be very high, and then as you fix the stuff, it should go down. But I'm saying you can have your what kind of whatever reporting you use, either Power BI, um, or SSRS, whatever works for you. So this is how you can save this in a table or in any other format that you prefer. So I talked about, oftentimes you will have situations that the default is not going to work for you. Say like I talked about, let me run this, like backup, right? By default, it checks for 7 days. What will happen if you have a situation that you want to, that 7 days is not good enough for whatever reason? You want to make sure that you have a full backup for every 3 days, right? You can do that. So again, as I said, this is kind of broken. I should probably, bring up another example. Um, and now I can have a override file. Name doesn't matter. I just gave it override to make this 7 days to a 3 days, right? So let's look at this file. How do we do that? This is your rule ID, and this is your override, and you just change the threshold to 3. This threshold word here, or the key, will not be threshold every time. It depends on what's in that rules, right? You have to look it up. Sometimes it will be a recommended value, sometimes it can be a threshold, so it will change. Now, once you do this, and as you can see that I have a sample path, means it's looking at for this file right here in the sample path, and you use that. Now it's going to check your full backup against 3 days. What will happen if you say, okay, I'm fine with all the databases 3 days, but I'm not fine with one database, right? I have one particular database that I want 3 days, rest all is good for 7 days, which is the default. The way you do that, you again override your ID, you set threshold 3, but then you filter your target. So what is this is saying? If I have a database name is Stack Overflow 2013, I'm going to check this one for full backup for every 3 days, but the rest of my databases can have a full backup every 7 days. Any question? Does this make sense what I said so far?
No questions yet.
Okay, thanks. So there are a couple of other ones that I wrote for for override, right? So you can take a look. I put enough comments here how you can check those. Now, I talked about that you can enable or sorry, you can disable a rule, right? By default, all rules are enabled because either there are rules that you don't need and not applicable to your environment, uh, and you are pretty sure, so you don't want to check those, right? Every time. The way you do that, again, you write a JSON file, and then you point to that. So let's look at that. Now, all these files that you see here is not written by me. They are all available in GitHub repo. You can download, you can look at those, modify, create your own, whatever you need. So as I said before, right, this word will change. Here I do not have a threshold, right? I still have an ID, I have item type, but I did not say threshold because here what I'm trying to change the property whether it's enabled, true or false. So if I say false, and then I point to that this way, and now if I get the items, you see that trace flag 634 TF634 ID is false, means it's not going to evaluate that rule for us because I turned it into disabled. Uh, Now I put some code how to check that the disable is really working. If you want to disable all trace flags, you can do that. Now all my trace flag tag rules are disabled. Or you can go one step further. You can say I want to disable all trace flags, but I want to enable the one um, that is tagged with performance. What does this do? Some of these will be true and some will be false. The ones that are true, they have a tag about performance, so they will not be disabled. How do you write your own rule? I put enough comments here, especially if you're using CLR. Uh, please read these rules. There are some prerequisites that you want to set up, and before you can use this. So I'm going to run this first, and then I'll talk about it. So this is a custom rule. It's checking database free space in the files, and the threshold is set to 25%. And because I only have 13%, it's giving me a warning, right? But say I wrote this initially, or I got it from a third party, but I cannot afford to keep 25% free space across the board, right? This is probably too much. I cannot afford that kind of free space, 25%. So I want to override that. So if I go and look at custom threshold change.json,
You've got about 10 minutes left.
sure. And I can change it to a 10%, right? And if we use that now, you will see that I'm not getting that warning that I was getting before because I switched my threshold from 25 to 10%. There are other new rules that I have here with PowerShell, with WMI and other ones and CLR. I'm not going to talk about this because most of this I did not write. And if you want to read more about new rules and modifying rules and overwriting, again I put some links here. Read those, please. So I talked about how do we run this across the board, right? So if you haven't heard of DBA tools, please look it up. There were sessions, I think, in bits about DBA tools. Chrissy, she lives in Europe. She from US. She started this project. There's hundreds and hundreds of people contributed to it. And I think there was a whole pre-con by Rob and Jess about this. Um, the first one or two, and the first or second day, I don't remember now. So combining some functions from DBA tools, and if you have, there's something called central management server where you can keep track of all of your instances and databases. By combining these two and using this command, you can run it against as many environment as you need, and you can schedule this, right? But again, there are, I wrote some point, you can expand this to, maybe move results to archive table, purge results based on your retention, how long you want to keep it, and then you want to build some reporting on top of it. Um, and I'm not going to run this because, in my demo environment, I don't have set up with a, CMS and with multiple instances, but I did, test this in my work, and we have a setup, so I know this works. Now, this is all well and good. Now, if someone come and say, I do not want to um, write PowerShell, I do not have time, what can I do? So I talked about extension. Now with the extension, as you can see, it's called SQL Assessment. It's by Microsoft, and it is recommended by Azure Data Studio, so it has good rating. One thing you have to be careful with this is you can only do one instance, right, at a time. You cannot do many with this. So if I connect to my local instance, you see this SQL assessment, this is coming. You can see this here only because I have the extensions enabled, right? And there are other ones, right? I have Azure SQL Migration, Machine Learning, SQL Agent. These are all extension based. That's why you see this here. Now, if I click this here and get some state back, I can just come here and I can say invoke assessment. Now it's running the assessment against my SQL Server. Now here, I did not have a choice to say run it either only for the server or for a single database. It actually will run for server and all the databases. And then later on, once it's done, you can do some filtering from here, and I'll show you some of this. So while this is running, I also talked about another thing is that in Portal now, you can run assessment for VMs, right? So I did spin up. So let me go to my resource group. Resource group is just a container. It's easier. Like once I'm done with this demo, I'm just going to delete this resource group, that resource group. And with that, everything is going to get deleted. So I do not have to go and delete everything. And you should always use resource group to group things together for permission, for a network security. Your life can be a lot better, by containerizing things the right way. Now, here I have a virtual machine. It's running SQL Server. If I go here, this is something new. Now, in order for you to see this here, you also need something called SQL IIS extension. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go and talk about that, but I already have extension, IIS extension enabled for this Azure SQL VM. Without that, you wouldn't see this here. Now, if I go here, I already ran the assessment this morning, as you can see, 11:51 and 11:39, because it takes some time. We don't have that time, but I can show you in the configuration, right? You first enable this. Now, where is this raw data going, right? Once you run this assessment, you have to have a log analytics workspace in the same subscription. I personally do not like this restriction. I'm going to find out, if there is any plan to allow this to save into a log analytics workspace to a different subscription, because in my production environment or at my work, for all the SQL Server, Azure SQL and SQL VMs, we have one log analytics workspace that we bring everything there, and then we query from there. Now, what is log analytics workspace? How do you query those with Kusto query language? I gave a 20-minute talk in bits. I also have a full session for an hour, how to get started with Kusto query. We do not have time to get there. So you enable it here. You point it to a log analytics workspace, which is a repository. And then you can also enable scheduling. I didn't do that. So you can say run it weekly, run it monthly, and what time and not, right? You can do that. Once you are done, you set this up. You can either manually run an assessment or it will run on a schedule, right? Now, if you click one of this, select the last one, and this is reading from a workbook, but the raw data is saved in your log analytics workspace using Kusto query language. This is just a predefined kind of another notebook with the comments and queries and visualization, right? Now I can see that it ran, out of 297, 271 passed, and then I have a couple of issues, right? And they also break down these issues in a different way, right? Medium, low, info, high. And it also categorized from a, application and system, in a two different way. You can see this, and then you can come here and click one, each one, and get more details, right? So, like run dbcc check db, it gives you more description, gives you a help link and all that. The other good part is if you want to download this into Excel and do some, pivot table, do some counts, you can do that. Or you can straight go to your, if you click this button, it takes you to your log analytics workspace and it gives you some KQL query to look at the raw data, right? So this is actually being saved here, SQL assessment CL. We can run this here and we can look at some raw data. And then you can modify this or, write your own query, write your own aggregation, whatever you want.
You've got 5 minutes left.
Thank you. So we come back here, we see that, this whole thing ran. We have a target, we can, choose here, filter, you can filter it by any of this column. But the cool thing I like here is you can export this in a script and it gives you a whole T-SQL that now you can run and save it into a table, right? Did you get disconnected?
Everything just paused for a while. I can see you, but not your screen.
Okay, I think we got disconnected. So I'm going to share again quickly. Just have, I know we have only 4 minutes. Can you see me now?
Yep, that's it. That's back.
Okay, thanks. So I can download this report in HTML format. I can save it. And now I can open it. So within a couple of clicks, if you have that extension, now you have a whole report about your instance, and it gives you all these reports that you can hand over to them and say, hey, these are the things not right. And if you're a consultant, you can work. If you're at a full-time job, you can have these reports, slowly fix things, and you can have a report and, go to your boss and show him, what your team is working on, what are the things you are improving on, right? And from here, you can also go to the GitHub repo. You can also look at what are the rules were, got ran. And like I said, there are other filters that you can go by tag and ID and all that. So that's all I have. I'm going to go back to my first notebook. As I said again, I'm going to repeat. Please give feedback, good, bad, constructive. Don't just say that you didn't like it. Tell us why you didn't like it. What could I do or the organizers do better next time so you have a better experience. Um, I know this is a quick rundown. If you have any question, comments later on, when you download and try to run this in your own environment or your test environment, if you want to follow up, please get in touch with me. I do follow all of this, right? Twitter, LinkedIn. You can send me an email directly or from my website. There's a contact page. You can contact me. I can guarantee you that you'll get a response within 2-3 days. So I appreciate you listening to me. Thank you. I know there are other sessions going on. I think there are 2 more left. So enjoy your rest of the day. And we have 2 minutes. So I'm just going to keep quiet. If there are questions, comments, please go ahead.
Right, I don't think there are any questions from this end and nothing from the web.
Okay, then. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the sessions. And if you're traveling back, safe travel.
Thank you.